First, every voice matters. Secondly, it's also about enhancing decision making. Thirdly, language accessibility. And finally, it's also about customer-centric approach.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Bruno van den Bosse. I'm a product manager at Televic Conference, and today I'm joined by my colleague Jonas.
Hi, I'm Jonas. I'm a product owner at Televic, and I'm mainly focused on Confero and extending our Confero software.
And today we will take you into our webinar on simplifying the interpretation for your meetings, both hybrid and multilingual meetings. As an overview of today's webinar, we will aim to keep it to approximately 30 minutes, and during the webinar there will be some polls and questions which give you the opportunity to win a gift card. The content of this webinar, first we will do a quick summary of why and how multilingual meetings are used in a typical meeting, for who it's relevant, and how the Televic product range can actually help you to conduct and manage your multilingual meetings. To explain that in more detail, we'll do a deep dive in the actual interpretation configuration of Confero. That will be done by Jonas, where we'll do really hands-on experience on the setup and configuration of Confero. So this webinar will give an overview of how of all the updates that we have done in Confero specifically related to the interpretation. But before we dive into that, I will start with giving you an overview of how interpretation and language features of Televic are used in different contexts and meetings. Most of you know Televic, I assume, but Televic equipment is used in different setups, ranging from very large institutions with formal meetings, a large number of participants, where there's a chairperson, where there's a clear need for interpretation, but just as well in more informal settings, think like a boardroom or a meeting with less participants, where there's very often also a hybrid participation. But more and more interpretation becomes important in these settings as well. And let's be clear, all of this is part of our motto of creating better understanding to make sure that everybody is heard, is being heard, you can understand what they are saying, and this includes in different languages as well. And if we are talking about people who need to understand or want to be understood, this ranges from the local participants who are part of the meeting and the people physically in the room using the equipment, but just as well remote participants, people participating through a laptop or tablet device from somewhere else and dialing into a meeting. And sometimes forgotten, but very important as well, are observers, and not everybody is actively participating in a meeting. You can be a type of event like think the announcement of a new Apple device, for example. There are a lot of people in the room all listening to what's being said, often also in different languages, and then you want to be able to distribute those different languages to the people in the room as well. And then last but not least are members of the press, who are always active or are listening into what's happening especially in public sector or government type of meetings like in parliament. They also want high quality recordings of what's being said, and for them we can offer press boxes where they can plug in their recording devices and select which channels they want to record. From the type of organizations or verticals that we want to talk about, I already mentioned the international institutions, where the international implies the multiple languages and the fact that interpretation is a requirement. But also think about rental events, and not all meeting rooms are fixed or there all the time. Some events are temporary, and in this context, the ease of setup, the ease of management and configuration is very important because the time is limited to set up a system, to configure it, and it must be very easy to make adjustments on the fly if that is required. A use case where I hope most of you are not involved into too much on a personal level, at least, are courtrooms. In the context of a courtroom, you do want to make sure that everybody participating in the case can be heard in their own language and can also understand what's being said. So that's we see more and more interpretation needs happening in these contexts as well. And then depending on the region or country you're in, and Belgium is a prime example of that. Parliaments very often also have multiple languages. For example, in Belgium, we have Dutch and French, and even a little bit of German that needs to be supported and for which interpretation can be foreseen. If we look from, or if we start from the point of view of the interpreter, the interpreter listens to the audio in the room and wants to give his interpretation and have that distributed into the room. The equipment they use for that is the Lingua ID interpreter desk. It's really a device that we made in collaboration with interpreters, which translates into physical buttons that can be used without looking at the device, audible feedback that is there, and really with a focus on the ergonomics. Do know there are two versions of this device, one with multimedia capabilities and one without. The version with multimedia capabilities also allows to connect in external screen so that you can very easily distribute video to that participant as well, or to that interpreter as well, so that they can always have a clear view of the room, because interpreters are not always located right next to the room where they have a full overview. To add the interpreter desks to a Plixus system, the setup of a Plixus system always evolves with the central units. And to that system, we can connect the interpreter desks just like any other delegate units by daisy chaining them over the Plixus network. The devices needed to listen to the interpretation channels, of course. There are different ranges, and the first that I wanted to discuss are the Plixus devices or the delegates devices. Highlighted here. And again, we have quite a broad spectrum of devices that are possible here, ranging from multimedia devices like our Unicos, the Flex devices with a touchscreen, and flush mount devices that can be installed flush into a desk. All of them by default are equipped with a 3.5 millimeter audio jack, so that you can use that in combination with the headphone to listen to the interpretation channels, or can optionally be equipped with an XLR connector for the flush mount units. All these devices can then be foreseen from a channel selector, either that's a physical one on the flush mount devices or on the Flex and Unicos. Those are enabled on the touchscreen by adding the correct license to the system. You can adjust then the volume, of course. And this way, up to 48 languages can be distributed within the Plixus network. So enough languages to meet all your most demanding meetings, I'm sure. If you want to go a little bit further and add wireless devices, again, there are multiple options. But the easiest one are Plixus or wireless Plixus devices. So the G4 access points plus the Flex G4 units, which can be added as normal Plixus devices. So the access point can be added into the network using the standard daisy chaining, connecting a Cat5 shielded cable to the wireless access point, and then the wireless units can connect to that access point. Important to know, as of that time, the system acts as one complete system, and the Flex wireless devices, the G4 devices, have the exact same features as the wired versions. The same type of functionality on the touchscreen, the same language channel selector, the audio jacks can also be used in a dual delegate mode, so that two participants can listen into the interpretation channels and both using a different language. So the person on the left could listen to French, the person on the right to Spanish, for example, without any problem. The only extra limitation that the wireless technology does imply is that there's a limitation of up to 8 languages that can be used. Other than that, the system acts as one solution, one system, and is very easy to set up and manage. If you look at the observers, the none of less active participants in the meeting, for that we actually have two solutions. And the first one that I wanted to introduce to you is Unite. Unite, very similar to the wireless G4 units. We can add an access point into the system, this time connected over Dante. And then the receivers connect to that wireless access point. Access point can support up to 4 languages, but you can combine up to 8 wireless access points together. So this brings the total to 32 languages that you can use in a single setup or in a room. All communication is encrypted, so virtually impossible to tap into due to the AES 256-bit encryption. And the wireless technology is DECT-based, so there's no interference with the normal Wi-Fi, for example. It's license-free, and the system has an automatic frequency management to make the optimal use of the wireless spectrum. This is on the transmitter side. On the receiver side, we have the Unite body packs. Again, you can connect your headphone or induction loop to it. It has an OLED display to select the correct language channel and a battery time of almost 32 hours. I'm showing you this picture from the Mahatma Gandhi Center in India. Square space of 6,000 square meters, so quite a large conference room. They were using 8 language channels in this room, and this could be served with only 2 Unite access points. So from a technical point of view, the setup and installation perspective, this is really easy to manage and set up due to the long range of the Unite receivers. And because it's a DECT-based signal, the line of sight, for example, is not important. As an alternative to Unite, we also have our infrared solution. And I wanted to introduce to you the Lingua IR, which again, and it's getting the same story over and over again, but connecting it over Dante in this case as well. You can connect the transmitter as well as the radiator, and then you have the wireless handheld devices that you can use to listen into the language channels. Making it quite easy and straightforward. The receiver itself can support up to 40 language channels, depending on the software license that you apply to the unit. Our IR standard compliant, so you can exchange the radiators and the receivers also with equipment from other vendors. So if you are already using a room where there are radiators installed, our receivers can work with those and vice versa. And our receivers come with a rechargeable battery with a battery lifetime of up to 20 hours. So again, long enough for your most demanding meetings. Oops, I forgot the image. The radiator itself is quite lightweight, so it's easy to set up and carry around, especially important in a rental setup or configuration. Standard mounting options with a VESA connector and the LED that can be controlled. The transmitter is also again self-contained, like almost all Televic equipment. So meaning that all configuration and all software settings are done on the device itself through a web server, and you can actually set it up quite easily without a lot of in-depth knowledge on the use of infrared itself. Audio is connected through Dante, and quite important when I mean you don't need a lot of background knowledge on to set it up. One of the key features of this solution is the automatic delay line compensation, which means that if you have different radiators in the room, you do not have to worry about synchronizing them manually. So the system itself can do this, so you can trigger the synchronization, and then it will happen completely automatically, and you don't have to worry about that at all. Now, these two last solutions, Unite and the IR, why or when should you use one or the other? And one of the main differences between the two is that Unite actually goes through walls and infrared stops at the wall. So depending on the setup, if you have a multi-room setup, for example, where participants move from one room to the other and always want to listen to the same audio channel, it's very easy to use infrared because there's no manual interaction needed by the delegate itself to change the audio channel. Unite, on the other hand, can go beyond those walls. It's encrypted, so the audio cannot be tampered with or cannot be listened into without any. It cannot be accessed. It works perfectly in outdoor sunlight. There's no no problem with that. And also important, you can have multiple systems in one room who are acting independently. So even if you're in split combined room type of setups, you don't even have to close the wall, for example, to shield off the IR to reaching from one side to the other. And now, before we continue, I wanted to introduce a very short poll to just validate on these last two solutions for language distribution for the observers. Which solution do you guys prefer? Do you more like the Unite solution that goes through the walls, that is encrypted, or the Lingua Infrared solution, which is stops at the wall, is very easy to use for multi-room setups? Thank you for filling out the poll. The next topic that I wanted to dive into is the remote participants. And as I hope you know, Televic has we have our own solution called Confero Meet, which can be added to any Plix system as well to allow remote participants to join into a managed meeting. If we go back to our network diagram, to add Confero Meet, we want to add the Plixus gateway on the left, and then through a cloud connection, remote participants can join into the meeting using their own laptop. Confero Meet is part of a bigger cloud-based solution management consisting of Plan for planning the meetings, Meet for actually having the meeting, and Confero Cam for camera tracking during the meeting itself. The interface, I won't dive in too deeply into this. We have a dedicated webinar that you can review on Confero Meet from some time ago. But the interface, as you can see, offers a video view of the remote participants, voting functionality as well. And what is also available in the bottom right corner, as you can see on this screenshot, is a language selection menu. So that if in the Plixus system there are interpretation sources available through the local interpreters, for example, the remote participants can also listen into these roles as well. The same goes for other types of integrations. We have Confero Meet for specific use cases, but in a lot of existing installations, customers do want to add existing unified communication platforms like Zoom or WebEx or Teams, and these can be added into the system as well. In this case, you do need a connection between a Zoom Room PC or a Teams MTR device, for example. That is connected to the central units to inject and extract the audio from the Teams call. And then you can very easily also integrate these languages as well. From the perspective of the end user, in the standard interface of Zoom or Teams, they can visualize or they can see how the languages are shown, are made available, and they can select the ones that they want to listen into. From a technical point of view, the languages from a Plixus system can be injected into a Teams or Zoom system, again through Dante and a specific PC that takes the role of the interpretation client, or and this way remote participants can listen into. But what is shown on the figure here is also to allow remote interpreters to join through Zoom or Teams. Zoom or Teams today also offer remote interpretation features, so an interpreter can use a Zoom or Teams client to provide the interpretation, and this interpretation can also be extracted through a Zoom PC or a Teams PC and injected into the Plixus system, for example, to allow external interpretation into the local room as well. So both ways are quite easily possible using a Dante connection between the central units and the cloud platform. This summarizes more or less the preamble or the introduction of this webinar, where we gave an overview of what the products are, how they can be used, how they can be used in combination with each other. And now we do want to dive in do more hands-on deep dive on Confero interpretation.
All right, let's go into the live demonstration of Confero interpretation. First of all, when you set up your system for the first time and you boot it up, obviously there are no boots yet, and you need to create those boots and assign interpreter desks to those boots to be able to use them for interpretation. Let's go into Confero. So here I will log in as a technician and I will navigate to the room section and the boots. Now in the boot section you see there are no boots yet, and we have 4 interpreter desks available. They are not yet used. Now an easy way to group those interpreter desks into multiple boots in the right order is by using the change desk order. So we'll open that now. And this now you will see on the video that the microphone buttons will start to highlight of the interpreter consoles. Now I can easily, when I press and hold one, and I press and release another desk, and release it, then they both are combined into the same boot. Bruno will do this for the other 2 desks. Yes, there they are. If I close this, you see that 2 boots are created. One boot with desk 1 and 2, and another boot with 3 and 4. Now I can give those boots a label if I want. For example, the first one I can call 1, and then the second one 2. All right, just like that. And now there are 2 boots created with the right interpreter desks. Now there's also a section here about RSI boots, so I can also create RSI boots, for example, RSI 1. And these boots are in fact virtual boots, so they don't contain local interpreter desks, but they need to be connected to an RSI management platform. All right, so now we have set up our boots, and it's time to switch back to the presentation. Okay, so now we learned how to set up your boots for the first time and assign interpreter desks to those boots. Let's continue with the interpretation configuration, but first, there's a question. What is your preferred way of assigning a Lingua ID to a booth? In the Confero software, by dragging and dropping the desks inside the booths, or automatically during initialization, so by pressing and holding the microphone buttons. That's the method that we've shown. Or do you think both are useful and it depends on the situation? Okay. Now, the interpretation configuration. Once we have our boots, we can create interpretation presets, configure the languages, or manage the audio routing, especially needed when, for example, you have external translation. Let's switch back to Confero. So we are still in the room section. Now we go to the interpretation section here, and you see on the left side, you have the active configuration, presets, and a shared language list. And then on the right side, you see the details of what is selected here. So it's the details, the language channels, and how they are configured. But let's start with the presets. So a preset is really handy when you have, for example, different types of meetings. Sometimes only a bilingual meeting with a few languages, maybe other times a very large multilingual meeting. You can create presets for these types of meetings up front. And just before the meeting starts, you just need to apply the right preset. Now, in the preset, if we open it, we see a number of language channels, in this case 4. And each language channel has a name and a display text. The display text is what's shown on the devices inside the room or in the booth. So I'll show it here. I can change the display text to French, for example, here, and there we go to English. All right. Now, next to that, you also need to be able to route where the audio from that channel is coming from. So it can be boot. In this case, boot means that it's coming from a local boot inside the room. but it can also be external, for example, Teams or Zoom. And then an important part of the channels are which boots are used for those channels. So if I go into edit mode, I can, for example, for French, select the first boot that we created, and for English, the second boot. Then there's one more thing, and that's the enabled property. The enabled property allows you to disable or enable a language. Now, disabling a language means that it's grayed out, and that language is not used anymore in the system, cannot be used anymore in the system. This can be handy, for example, if for some reason you don't need Dutch in this case in the meeting, you can just disable it, but not remove it from the preset. It still remains in the preset, and the next time you use it and you need it, you can just enable it again. Now I'll disable it, save the preset, and activate this preset. You see that Confero switched to the active configuration now, because our preset was activated. Now, what is the difference between active configuration and a preset? The active configuration is what's live in the system. It shows you what is currently happening. Now, one thing that is really nice about this approach is that you can still make changes to the active configuration. For example, maybe I do need Dutch in the next meeting. I enable it again and I apply the changes. You see that the active configuration turns orange now. This means that a change was made compared to the preset it is based upon. Now, this change is volatile. It's not yet saved, and that's why it's orange. If I want to save it, I can still choose to save it to the same preset or to a new preset. I will not save it right now. It's just a temporary change. All right. This is the active configuration. Now, another aspect of interpretation are the shared language lists. Now, this list allows you to create an ordered language list up front, and you can use that list between all of your interpretation presets. So you don't need to create that list always again and again if you create a new preset. In this case, we have a number of languages, and suppose I want to add a new language channel. I can just press Add Channel, and it will automatically use the next available language. If I want multiple languages, I can keep clicking, and you see that the next languages from the list are just added automatically. So I don't need to type in the name or the display text anymore. All right, I remove them again and apply the changes again. Then there's still one more thing, which is the settings. Now in the settings, you see we have a headset selection space, and there you can choose the default headset for the interpreter consoles. This default headset will be applied every time the system reboots. So your system always starts up in a clean state. You don't need to manually deselect or change it back to the default headset. There's also a button to push it manually to the unit, but pay attention, this will in fact change the currently selected headset on all active consoles. A second option here is the slowdown button. The slowdown button, if you enable it, allows the user to, or the interpreter, to use the slow button on the interpreter console. When the slow button is pressed, and I'll do it right now, okay, then you see a notification on the screen and an API event is sent. Now, an external service could use the API, the slow down API events, and, for example, inform the chairperson or the command room that there is possibly an issue with people talking too fast in the room. Okay, this was all about interpretation. What do we need? And maybe I'll just go back to the channel list. What do we need, for example, if we want to use external languages? So in this case, I have another preset, normal external. Let me activate that one. Okay. Before we can use external interpretation, we need to make sure that the audio is coming from an external source and is injected into the right channels. And that's where we go to the audio configuration. You see it looks more or less the same as the interpretation configuration, but here we have the possibility to see a routing matrix. Now, typically, if I expand the number of the language channels, reserved language channels, we see that there are 11. And this was typically the limit in Confero, but now you're able to, for example, increase that number to a lot more language channels. Now, just to make it a bit more smaller, I will just, for example, choose 5 channels. All right, now we have 5 language channels. Let's go into edit mode, expand the languages again. And now we see on the input side, we see the 5 language input groups. Now we were talking about injecting external interpretation. So to be able to do that, we need to have a external input. And in that case, if I open a input group, I can, for example, add a Dante input to, and already prepared that, to this input group. I did the same for the other languages. All right. And on the output side, in fact, you can do the same. So for example, you might want to distribute the language channels to another room, or you want to record the interpretation channels. And that's in that way you can do the same thing. You can add a Dante output to the language output groups. Now for recording, you could say like, I don't want the floor backup inside the recording. So in that case, you cannot change the backup nodes here, but what you can do is you can add a custom language output group, assign it to a language, assign it to a Dante output, for example, and then immediately a dry channel is created. This dry channel can then be used for the recording. You can still change here you can change the backup nodes if you want. So you're free to choose what you want to configure, and you can repeat this for every language in your system. So for example, for the second one. Okay. Now, another special type of output group is a floor for the interpreters. Let me create one. And maybe for now, I'll just link it to the floor input. Now, what's the typical use case of a separate floor for the interpreters? Well, suppose you are distributing the video from the room to the interpreter brutes because the interpreters want to see what's going on in the room. Well, video typically lags a bit behind the audio. And in that way, by creating a separate floor for the interpreters, you can delay the audio for the interpreters via, for example, a DSP. But another application is the ambience noise. So the ambience mic, it's a special type of input group. So I can select ambience. Let me call it amp. I can select a auxiliary or Dante. I will not do it right now. And then I can link that ambience microphone input to my floor for the interpreters. Now, what will happen if nobody is speaking in the room, so no microphone is active, then and only then the ambience microphone will be activated and the interpreters will hear the ambient noise in the room. So this gives them an impression of what's going on inside the room. Okay. Now, we have added several Dante outputs and Dante inputs to our language channels. But what if something's wrong? You want to tweak the audio a bit, it's too loud, it's too quiet, you don't hear it, you just want to see what's happening. So let's first apply this matrix and then go to the audio settings. If I expand the Dante section here, you can see we have some gains that we can tweak for the Dante inputs and outputs. And you also see a level meter. And let me first enable one of the microphones. Okay, so one of the interpreter microphones is active, and you see immediately that the audio is coming through via the second Dante output. If I want the audio to be more quiet, more loud, I can still tweak the gain here. All right, and now we go back to the presentation. Okay, so we saw how to create interpretation presets, how to configure the languages, and also manage the audio routing for external and internal audio sources. Now, in the next step, during the meeting, an operator needs to know what's happening. Maybe even needs to be able to control some things. So that's why we introduce a monitoring and control. Let's go. We are back in Confero. I will now log in as first log out as the technician and then log in as a operator. And you see the operator by default has a room layout page, but can also now navigate to a interpretation monitoring page. Here you see our different booths, so booth 1 and 2, French and English. We also have the RSI booth, the remote simultaneous interpretation booth, which is currently not used. And you see that the first is active and the second boot is not active. We can expand those and we see, first of all, the microphone status of the desks inside the boot. We see the incoming relays and how they are configured. We see the outgoing channels, A, B, and C, and how they are configured. And we also see the microphone input that is selected. So typically this is for example, in this case, the gooseneck microphone, but it could also be, if a headset is plugged in, the microphone of the headset. Now, if I go to the interpreter desk, you can see that I can change some of the relays, and that will be visible on the monitoring page. I can also change the status, and it immediately reflects on the monitoring page. I can also change, for example, the B channel, like that. Okay, now this is a read-only view. And what we introduce now is also, and therefore I go back to the technician and to the user role permissions, which is over here. This allows me to, for example, give the operator write access to the interpretation monitoring page, allowing to trigger microphone activations or change the microphone selection. Let me go back to the operator. Now you see the view says it's locked. I can unlock it, and now I can actually enable or disable the microphones of the interpreter desks. I can also change the selected microphone input. But as this might not be wanted in all cases, there is a way to be able to lock it or to retract the permissions for the operator or the chairperson role. So this is the interpretation monitoring and control page. Let's go back to the presentation. So we saw how an operator can monitor and control the interpretation during the meeting, and that was the last step of the live demonstration. A new question: what step is not necessary to use external language injection? Configure the external audio source in the language input, set the language channel to external, or create an extra language channel for the remote interpreter. What do you think? Okay, then we continue. For the summary, Bruno?
Yep. Thank you, first of all, Jonas, for giving your expert view on the interpretation configurator and taking us for a deep dive along the way. The key points that I took away from your explanation was that the room and boot setup is actually quite easy to set up and configure through a standard web interface. So there's no software needed. It's just browse through the central unit and you're ready to go to set up everything you need. From the interpretation configuration with the new Confero Advanced Interpretation license, we can support up to 48 languages, which is a serious step up from the 11 languages that were supported before. And it's actually really easy to set up external languages, just the single click, basically to have this configured, set up with Teams, with Zoom, with AI tools. It's a piece of cake, basically. And then finally, what I really liked myself is the operator functionality that you can very easily monitor, see what's happening as an operator, and even take action to activate or deactivate the microphone control or switch from headset to the gooseneck microphone if that's
right.
needed.
So in case of issues, suppose there's a problem with the headset microphone, you can easily switch back to the gooseneck.
Yeah. So that's taking us a step from not only providing a great solution for the interpreters with our Lingua ID interpreter desk, but also providing a great interface to the operators that need to manage and make sure that the meetings run well as well. There's a summary of today's webinar. Of course, this was a major update from last year. There are still things that we plan to keep further improve our system, and two important aspects that we already want to give a sneak preview or at least announce to all of you today is that we are working very hard on a solution for boot coupling and coupling with interpretation hubs. We see that in more and more organizations, the cost of adding interpretation booths to all rooms or the need for flexibility to dynamically add more interpretation hubs to rooms that not necessarily are equipped becomes more and more important. So we are expanding our solution that you can easily connect booths that are in an interpretation hub or share booths from another room to accommodate those needs. And last but not least, also the Lingua ID will get a software update to make it fully compatible with the new ISO 20109 standards, so that we're completely on par with all the latest and requirements on that level as well. Important to note, I think, is that it's a software-only update, so there's no new hardware needed. All your existing Lingua IDs can be upgraded to this new version as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, I think that summarizes it for today. If there are any questions unanswered in the chat, we will linger along a little bit longer to answer those. Thank you all for joining, and looking forward to see you again in the next time. And to find out which webinars are coming up next, please visit our website. You can find it on the webinars section under support, where you can, in a few days, you will be able to re-look or revisit this webinar and watch the recording. And all new webinars will be announced on this one as well. So if you aren't subscribed yet to our website, please do so, and you will be informed via email as well. Looking forward to see you again next time, and hope the same for you, Jonas.
Yeah, thanks for joining and see you later. Bye-bye.
First, every voice matters. Secondly, it's also about enhancing decision making. Thirdly, language accessibility. And finally, it's also about customer-centric approach.